Welcome back to the Almost Unbelievable YouTube channel with me, your host, Ranty. Thank you very much for stopping by. Now, on the 4th of March in 2008, the town of Buchwald in eastern Victoria in Australia would never be the same again. A young man who lived in the town called Julian Buchwald had decided to go on a picnic with his girlfriend, Carolynne Watson. And she lived just 8 miles away down the road in a little town called Churchill. Now, Carolynne, being 17 years of age at the time, had decided to wait until she'd finished her studies and felt that she was old enough to actually marry. So at that point, even though they were boyfriend and girlfriend, essentially they'd only got around to holding hands with each other. Now, Julian's parents owned some land in Buchwald, and it was quite a substantial piece of land. It was about 5 kilometres squared, or if you do it in miles, it would be about 2 miles squared. And on the property, they had beautiful places to go. They had a lovely waterfall, and this is where Julian had decided to take Carolynne on this picnic. So early in the morning, he'd picked her up in his 4-wheel drive Nissan Patrol, and they had set off with picnic in hand. They were driving along the road to get to the destination when all of a sudden Julian says, "Hey, did you see that back there?" And Carolynne said, "What?" He said, "Well, I've just seen a dead animal on the road and I would like to go and check it out." So he drove around the corner ever so slightly, just out of view of the remains, and he got out and he walked back to the carcass. Now, Carolynne had been used to Julian doing this kind of thing. Apparently it wasn't unfamiliar of him to do this. And so as the minutes ticked on by, she wasn't too worried, until it got to around about 10 minutes later and she's thinking, where is Julian? What is he doing? Why is it taking so long for him to go and check out this carcass? I find it incredibly strange. What's going on? So she's waiting, and then out of the corner of her eye, she looks in the mirror, the side view mirror, and she can see somebody running up the road, all dressed in black, with a balaclava on and gloves. And before she has time to react, before she has time to even think, what on earth is happening here, the person is at the car door, and they're pulling at the car door, and they open it up, and they grab a hold of her, and they drag her out. And that's where she's bound and gagged and essentially restrained. She's then picked up and thrown into the back of the car, and she doesn't know what's going on. She has no idea where Julian is, and she's absolutely terrified, as you can imagine. Now, just prior to this, Julian had gone to look at the carcass when all of a sudden he heard some footsteps behind him, and then clonk, somebody smashed him on the back of the head and knocked him out cold, completely cold. And the next thing you know, he's in the car too, and they are being taken over 100 miles away to a different location. Now, they drive for several hours, and then all of a sudden the car starts to slow down, and as it slows down, comes to a stop, and the driver gets out of the car, comes around to the back of the car, opens the back door, pulls Carolynne out, and puts her down on the floor. Shortly after there, she starts to hear some digging going on, and she can tell that there is a pit being dug in front of her. She can tell by the sound of it. Now, Carolynne is still tied up at this point, and she's still blindfolded, and she has no idea what on earth's going on. And then all of a sudden she starts to feel her clothes being cut away, and before long she has had all of her clothes completely taken off of her. Now, Carolynne, feeling that this is absolutely her last moments to live, she starts to do what a devout Christian would do, and she starts to pray. And she's praying really hard for anything, somebody to come and save her, maybe this ordeal to be over quick, maybe what she thinks in her head may be going to happen that doesn't happen. And all of a sudden, the attacker disappears. He goes, he vanishes. And she's not sure now whether or not this is a ruse or something like that. So she doesn't want to get her hopes up, but it's gone eerily silent, and for all she knows now, she's on her own and she needs help. Now, as she sat there, she hears a voice in the distance, and it's calling out, but she can't really make it out right now. She has no idea exactly what's being said or where it's coming from, but she can hear a voice, and she listens, and she's listening hard. And as it gets nearer and louder, she can start to understand that actually she recognizes this voice. This voice is of Julian. And Julian, who had just been knocked out and had still been tied, he too had also been stripped completely naked as well, and he's making his way towards Carolynne. And of course she is overjoyed to hear his voice, and she screams out to him and says, I'm here, and he runs over towards her, and the two of them are now together, still bound. Their hands are still bound completely, and yet for some unknown reason the attacker who had brought them to this location had, fortunately for them, left a knife on the floor not far from where they were, and they were able to get a hold of the knife, pick it up, free themselves from the bonds that they were in, and try to figure out what on earth had just gone on. Now, even though their clothes had been cut off, as luck would have it again, and I don't know whether this was through prayer or not, but as they turned around they could see that on the floor the attacker had also left them some food and a sleeping bag. I mean, this was incredibly good luck, and they both quickly grabbed up these items and they fled. They ran as fast as they could, and they're off. They're into the bushes. So now they're fleeing through this rural area that they have no idea where they are, and of course the sun's up and it's very hot, really hot, and they have no clothes on, they have no protection from this sun, and they're getting sunburn all over. They're running through the bushes, they're getting scraped and cut, and the thorns are digging in them, and every time they're putting their feet down on the floor, they're standing on something sharp. They're in an absolutely torturous situation, but all they can think about is getting as far away from the attacker as possible, and they just keep on running and running and running. Now eventually they get far enough away from their attacker where they actually feel that they're safe, they can sit down for a moment and they can compose themselves and try to find any way out of this situation. But by now it's starting to go dark, and they need to rest, they need to find shelter somewhere, and they need to warm up, because as the sun's setting, it's getting cold. And as you know, in Australia, when the sun's out it's hot, and if you're in the desert at night, it's absolutely freezing cold. So they need to get warm somehow, some way. Now bearing in mind they only have a sleeping bag at this time, but the two of them, they both squeeze into it. Again, they still don't have any clothes on, and the two of them are starting to get really cold by now. The heat is not really doing enough. The sleeping bag isn't keeping them warm enough, and so Julian comes up with this idea to try and stay a little warmer, and he suggests consummating their relationship. Now, being that they're both devout Christians, they would know that in the eyes of God that would be a sin, and Carolynne is not too happy about this idea. She understands where he's coming from. A little bit of human skin on skin connection might just be what they need to stay warm and survive the night, but she's not willing to sacrifice her virginity, being that she is clearly a very devout Christian. Julian, on the other hand, he wants to give it a go. He wants to try anything to try and stay warm. But as the night drags on, they decide not to consummate their relationship, and they finally get some much needed sleep. So back in Budgeree, when Julian and Carolynne did not return and it went past 3 o'clock, Julian's mother started to worry. And as time ticks on and time ticks on, she started to get a little restless. So she took herself outside and she starts walking up and down her property, her front yard, when she sees something sticking in the fence. She had a wire fence around her property and she could see something stuck inside of it. So she went over and she had a look, and she realised that there was a bottle there with a letter inside. And she had no idea what this was, but she thought she'd have a look, so she went and she pulled the bottle out and she opened the letter. Inside of the letter was basically demands from the kidnapper, who had said, "We have your people. Do not tell the police. We will return them when we have finished our business here. And if you need to, just tell people that they went away on holiday." And of course, this was quite terrifying, but it went on, and it also threatened the lives of both Carolynne and Julian. So the dilemma was, do you tell the police or not? And she went straight to the police. She let them know what had been going on. The police arrived, they scanned the letter, and after reading it, could see that it was essentially signed by some members of a satanic cult. A satanic cult that actually didn't exist in Australia at the time, but still, it was signed by them, and of course, this terrified the police, because this satanic cult was known for doing some very bad things in their initiation ceremonies. So with this in mind, they now have an idea of who potentially has taken them and what the potential motives could be. So they immediately start a land and air search of the area, and they're looking for any signs of Julian or Carolynne, and they spend hours all through the night, all the next day, 2 days, and they are looking and looking, and they cannot find any sign of them whatsoever. So the police, they decide to, at the same time, go to Carolynne's parents' house and interview them to find out if they know anything about the whereabouts of these two. And what they do find is that they also received a letter about 10 days prior to them going missing. And this letter was signed essentially by the same satanic cult. And again, it was a threatening letter. So now they have 2 people missing, they have 2 letters, essentially from the same person, the same kidnappers or the same group. And yet aside from that, they really don't have any other clues as to where they are. So they go to the local church and they ask the pastor there, "Hey, these 2 people that are missing, can you give us a little bit of insight into their relationship? Maybe you know something, maybe they've confided in you something. Can you give us anything that we can work on?" And the pastor says something rather odd. He says, "Maybe they just ran away. It's my belief that they probably ran away because I spoke with them not long ago and they were talking about getting married. And with them being young, it's quite possible that they may just have run off together and absconded, gone and got married, and will be returning anytime soon." So the police, they looked into that and they weighed up the pros and cons of that. But they noticed there was no bank withdrawals. They had no money on them. They had no food. They had no spare clothes with them. Essentially, there was no indication that this would be a reason for them not appearing for the last few days, because you would expect them to have needed those things if they were going on a journey to go and get married. So they quickly ruled out that. Now, a couple of days after they went missing, whilst the police are doing all they can in Budgeree, Carolynne and Julian are wandering in and around Alpine National Park. And they get turned around, they get lost, they are seemingly wandering around in a circle. And as luck would have it, they actually stumble across the same place where they had first been dropped off. And as luck would have it, they actually spotted a rucksack on the floor, not far from the area that they left, and they could see the rucksack. They recognized the rucksack, and inside of it was clothing. It was their clothing, it was their bag. Of all the coincidences to happen, this was probably the best, because they had been naked for days, and now they could get out of the sun, they could put some clothes on, and they could get some protection, both from the sun during the day and the cold at night. So they went and they got dressed, and they decided to try and get out of there finally. They knew that they'd come from this direction, but let's go this direction and let's see if we can get out of here. We need to find help. And yet every time nighttime came around and it got really, really bitter, Julian really wanted to stay warm. He continually wanted to consummate the relationship. And every night, Carolynne said no. And after a week or so, eventually, they found a path. And on the path, it took them to a road. And on the road, there was a farmer, and he was driving his car down the road. They flagged him down, and they were finally saved. Now, at the same time in Budgeree, the police, by this time, it would have been a week later, had changed the MO of the investigation from that of looking for them to be found safe and sound to actually looking for bodies. And of course, they were as shocked as anybody when they got a call to say that both Carolynne and Julian had been found together, and they were alive, and they were over 100 miles away. So of course, the police have to go and pick them up, and they are there as soon as possible. They get there, and the first thing they do, they want to speak to them, they want to interview them whilst things are fresh in their mind. They want to know everything that went on, because any small detail, no matter how small it may be, may help them find whoever had captured them. And so Carolynne starts giving her version of events as to what had actually happened, and so does Julian. Julian explains that he'd been hit on the back of the head, he'd been knocked unconscious. This is when they arrived at the Alpine National Park, and that he had made his way to Carolynne, and this is where the two of them freed themselves from their bonds. But upon inspection of the wound on the head, they could tell that this doesn't really look like a very big bruise or a wound big enough or capable enough to have knocked you out. So they were already a little suspicious at this time. So the police wanted to find the location where they'd been dropped off near Alpine National Park, and they got to the location, they found the spot, and they were able to find duct tape, rope, a knife, and a shovel, also some bits of clothing. And the strangest thing was that all of these items didn't come from anybody else. They were actually owned by Julian himself, and they found it incredibly strange that if somebody was going to kidnap somebody and go to all this trouble and leave notes over a period of 10 days, a note at Carolynne's mum's house and a note at Julian's mum's house, if they went to all this planning, why didn't they bring their own equipment? If they knew that they were going to need these things, why did they decide to use Julian's? And so the cogs started turning, and the police started to realise that maybe there wasn't a kidnapper at all. Maybe all of this was Julian. And so they brought him in and they asked him, and they said, look, we don't believe you. There's enough evidence here to suggest that everything you've told us is a complete lie. And after several hours of interrogation, he finally broke down and he admitted it. And he said the reason he had done it was he wanted to get intimate with Carolynne. And ultimately, he wanted to marry her. And he thought by doing this, this would be the way to achieve his goal. He, of course, was arrested and charged with all manner of crimes, including abduction. And after his trial had finished and he was awaiting sentencing, he decided to flee. He coloured his hair and he changed the colour of his skin ever so slightly, and he decided to try and get to India. Now, funnily enough, his disguise was good enough to get out of Australia, but when he landed in India, he of course was arrested. He was then extradited back to Australia, where in total he was given 7 years and 9 months in prison. So by now, Julian is free and out in the world. Just be careful you don't go on a picnic with him. Now, I've been Ranty, and I'll see you all in the next one.